I'm Sharon Brett Kelly, and I'm standing on a very busy Mount Smart Road in Onehunga in Auckland, and I'm standing right outside a big empty lot that used to be Kainga Ora housing, and now the buildings have been torn down and it's surrounded by high construction fencing. 186 units were going to be built here, but it's been cancelled along with more than 200 others by Kainga Ora, and that amounts to 3,479 homes. And it's all part of Kainga Ora's reset program. Today on The Detail, I'm going to talk to my colleague at Newsroom, Jonathan Milne, about why this project and more than 200 others have been cancelled, and what Kainga Ora plans to do, or how it plans to house all those people who were living in these houses that have now been pulled down. Later I'm going to talk to a community housing leader who says we're short tens of thousands of homes and billions in funds, but he still reckons we can fix it. First though, Jonathan.
3,500 homes that Kainga Ora was planning to build are not now going to proceed. The plan's been shut down entirely. In some cases, like Jordan Ave here, they bulldozed lots of apartments.
62 state houses were removed to make way for apartments. The demolition alone cost $1 million. Another $350,000 was spent on consultants, consents and site works.
And moved people out to the four winds, pulled them away from their schools, from their communities, from their healthcare, whatever else, in order to build new apartments, and in some cases with the guarantee to these people that once those apartments were built, they would have first dibs on moving back into them and moving back into their communities and their schools and everything else.
Is that right? They were actually promised that they could...
Yep, here in Onehunga, a lot of people got that guarantee from Kainga Ora. Now they've decided that they're not going to rebuild on this site. I've previously been told by Kainga Ora that they plan to sell off chunks of it to private developers.
This Onehunga land will be sold for public and private development sometime in the future.
We don't know whether they'll sell off the whole property or when, but I think what Jeremy and Gemma are going to find out is that they're going to have a vacant lot next door for a very long time, because no developers can even get finance. I mean, to build new private developments at present. You can't buy against the promise of pre-sales now. So in the current environment, I think Kainga Ora is going to find it hard to sell the land, and anyone who does want to move in there is going to be running a very tight budget, very tight finances, and to be blunt, they're not going to be putting in elegant master planned developments like Kainga Ora was going to, like Auckland has just across the road. What's going to go in here is, I think, more likely to be a fragmented mishmash of cheap apartments.
Well, I'm off to talk to Jeremy and Gemma, mentioned there by Jono. They live next door to this big block of land. When they bought 7 years ago, they were told they were getting a new, well-designed Kainga Ora development. It's been on and off ever since, as the governments have changed. Now they've no idea what or who will be their neighbours. Hi, I'm Sharon.
Yeah, so when we were looking to buy the place, they had they actually had the plans of the development on the bench when we were coming through on the open homes. So they were sort of really upfront, like, hey, this is the development next door. And when we bought, we were kind of like, oh, well, you know, it will never look worse than it currently does, was our thinking, right?
Because that was when the old building was up.
And at that stage, they'd removed all the tenants from the building next to us. And so we bought it knowing that it was going to be basically 2 years. We had a long conversation with the community manager around what the development was going to look like, how long it was going to take, demolition, construction, all that sort of stuff. And we were like, okay, cool. We moved in 2019. And then nothing happened. It was just an empty building next door, and we were like, what's going on? One night in July that year, around 5 p.m, I saw lights on in the building next door, and I thought, this is very strange. And what was even stranger was that it was a plasterer who was plastering the walls. So I called the community manager, and she said, oh yes, we're moving people back in because everything's just taking a bit longer. And Subsequent to that, I found out that even though they had the whole design all signed off, when the new government came in and the new Kainga Ora charter was put through legislation, it meant that every single development that Kainga Ora was doing needed to go through and be reapproved.
When you talk about the new government, was that the Labour government that came
Yes.
in? Okay.
Yeah. Obviously, it's been an empty site for over a year now, and that piece is lovely for us living right now. But in terms of it, it's not a long-term solution
No.
to have, and that's not what it's going to be long-term. And I think the thing that I wonder about is how much of this development next door is just now going to be completely piecemeal. Are they going to sell it off in one large block to someone who's going to have a similar master plan that's intelligently done? Or are they going to sell it off in bits and pieces to someone who's going to do crammed terrace housing there and a 5-storey apartment building there?
What have you been told by Kainga Ora about the plans for that?
Well, not much. And so I think I've had to be a bit of a thorn in their side. On one hand, I kind of sympathise because you don't kind of want to tell people what you're about to do until you really know what you're about to do. And Kainga Ora, from the outside, just as someone who's trying to communicate with them and trying to get answers out of them, I could just tell they were wrapped up in a huge change process. And it's really hard as a big organisation to be going through a massive change process while you still have to keep doing your day-to-day. But we're trying to figure out, do we stay here? Do we sell? How do you sell a house with a massive development next door that you have no idea what it's going to be? But, for us, at least it's been nice having almost 2 years of complete silence and a little wildlife sanctuary next door.
We're not there with a mass plan to sell off state houses. What we are there to do is actually increase the stock of social housing.
This is the Prime Minister talking about Kainga Ora 12 months ago, shortly after the review by his predecessor, Bill English.
The word social housing, state housing gets thrown around. That is comprised of houses that KO build and provide through state houses, but also there are many good community housing providers, Salvation Army, Habitat for Humanity, iwi boards and trusts that actually do building of community housing programs as well. Rest assured, we're about increasing the spaces, social housing places. That's important, but what you've got to do first and foremost is you cannot carry on with the way that KO has been managed. This is an organisation that has run up huge amounts of debt, added $10 billion worth of debt over the last 6 years under the previous administration, and on a pathway to $29 billion worth of debt by 2033.
And we've heard that message repeatedly right up until last month's announcement that nearly 3,500 planned homes have been cancelled. Jonathan Milne says Kainga Ora's hands are tied.
Sir Bill English's review showed that their debt levels and their finances were not well managed, and the money wasn't there to keep on borrowing and building at the rate they had been. The new government came in and said, you can't continue this way. You're going to have to make some massive cuts. The new government also believes in outsourcing to the community housing sector where possible, rather than the government being a landlord and building its own properties. So the total number of Kainga Ora homes is going to hit a ceiling very shortly. They will not be increasing the number, and any increase in demand is going to have to be met by private landlords and by the community sector. So it is a dramatic change from the big growth that Kainga Ora saw previously. It's really difficult for the tenants. And that was what I tried to write in my story. The story I tried to tell is to actually talk to the tenants of Kainga Ora, because in all this discussion we've heard a lot of talk about dollars and hectares and numbers of residences and maybe not cubic metres, square metres at least. But we haven't heard from the voices of the tenants. Just across the back fence there's a Kainga Ora rental property, and I talked to the family there. There's a dad and 5 sort of teenage, young adult kids. They've lived there 20 years. All the kids went through the local schools. They're engaged in the community. They're part of the community. So we may look and say, state housing is a last-ditch backstop for people who can't find anywhere else. But it has been a home of necessity for people, and people have cared for some of their homes, and they've been part of the community. But now that people are being moved to other Kainga Ora residences, I'm sure, but moved out nonetheless from their communities, those connections have been broken. You know, I spent days actually trying to find former tenants of Jordan Ave to talk to. I couldn't find any. No one knows where they've gone. No one has their phone numbers anymore. They've just kind of disappeared. And I used to be on the board of the local school. We didn't know where they'd gone either. We didn't know where the kids had gone.
Because, I should point out that this place is close to your heart. You're part of this community.
Yeah, it's a vibrant, beautiful community, Onehunga, and it's a diverse community, and I think it's a pretty engaged community. And so it does make me sad to realise that there were people in our community who weren't engaged as well as I guess we thought we were all engaging, and that because we're responsible for this, we've all lost touch with each other when they've moved on now.
So we're talking about 3,500 future homes for people. Is there a guarantee that everyone will have a home? I mean, surely these places were planned because of a need.
Yeah. So I think the point we need to make is that, by the end of 2026, there will be more Kainga Ora residences than there were 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 years ago, despite the fact that they've demolished 5,000 homes over the past 7 years, according to the number crunching I've done. They've built as many, and they're newer homes, and they're drier homes, and they're better insulated, and they're warmer. So that's a good thing. But that stops now. It's over.
They're not. There's no more building.
They're finishing off a few more builds for the next 12 months or so. But after that, it will only be replacement level. But there won't be an increase in numbers. But, there is an increase in population, and there is inbound migration. And we've already got a housing shortage. We've already got long state housing waiting lists. I talk to local community leaders, and they say we are seeing around the country a resurgence of people sleeping in their cars, of people rough living. So if Kainga Ora is the last resort, then I don't know where those people go.
The plan is that community housing providers, or CHIPs, step up. But are they ready? Paul Gilbert heads Community Housing Aotearoa, which looks after about 100 CHIPs, running more than 30,000 homes around the country. I called him on his way to the opening of a new Papakainga project outside Rotorua. It was pouring with rain, and the line is a bit dodgy.
There's a fantastic Māori trust and kaupapa Māori organisation there, Tauhara number 2. They've got a geographical area that sits basically in between Rotorua and Taupo. And so they've been building Papakainga and Kaumātua housing there on that road in between the two towns.
You've worked in this sector for a long, long time. How would you describe things at the moment in terms of providing social housing for the people most in need?
We've been building steadily as a community sector over the years. There's not been great long-term planning in New Zealand for housing for a long time, say decades, and there still is not any really significant long-term plan in place for the provision of affordable housing. The last government invested a lot of money, but predominantly through its own provider, Kainga Ora, into building new social housing. Some people call it public housing, some people call it state housing. We call it social housing because it can be provided either by Kainga Ora or by the community housing sector. At the moment, this government is saying that it wants to back the community housing sector, and you'll hear Chris Bishop talking about levelling the playing field. And so to partially answer your question, what Chris Bishop's been doing with a number of the reforms that he and Nicola Willis have put in place since they took over 18 months ago is they've been trying to create circumstances where, for example, we as community housing providers can get access to finance on terms that work and at a lower cost in the same sort of way that Kainga Ora, the state provider, can do. And they've made significant changes and improvements that will support our 100-odd members to get access to finance in order to build and own as many of those houses as possible. But overall, the answer to your question is that there's a significantly reduced level of investment for the foreseeable future in new social housing supply, regardless of who delivers it.
And why is that? Is that because the government is pulling away from that?
Yeah, look, I think Chris Bishop's got if you look at the detail, because I mean he's got an extraordinary track record as the Minister of Housing and RMA reform and his other portfolios of saying what he's going to do and then doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And so his firm belief is through the Going for Growth work that he's doing, he's saying that he thinks if he can get rid of planning blockages and such like, that he can get the housing market to perform better. Now, whilst that would be a good thing and that is likely to happen over the long term, the honest truth is that throughout New Zealand history and the rest of the world, unless the government's involved through some subsidy or some form of support in commissioning lower quartile affordable housing, it doesn't get commissioned. The market is not designed to build low-cost affordable housing for poor and low and moderate income New Zealanders. And so, yes, there is a redefined role of the government playing out at the moment where it seems to see itself as having a diminished role in commissioning new affordable housing supply. And so what I'm encouraging our members to do as best as they possibly can is to partner up with churches and faith groups, partner up with local government to try and deliver as many affordable homes as they can. So that's affordable rentals, and in some cases that's progressive home ownership and shared equity products to help families who are able to move into ownership tenures. But there is an overall diminishing occurring in long-term investment into new social housing.
So are you saying that even though you're encouraging your members to go out and get the funds from wherever they can, from churches, whatnot, but there just isn't enough of it?
Yeah, that's right. If you look at the latest data, there was a report that just came out last week, in fact, on what we call in our sector the intermediate market. Another name for the intermediate market is households who are what we would call stressed renters. Those now number in the hundreds of thousands, so somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 households who are paying 30, 40, 50% of their total combined household income on their rent, which means they're stressed, which means if the car breaks down or there's a life event, a divorce or a loss of a job, they spin out from the private rental market and they end up on the waiting lists for far higher levels of government subsidy and far higher levels of support. And so, yeah, what we're seeing is a growing deficit of affordable housing. And for your listeners, that's not the market. That's not, realestate.co.nz. That's housing that's being provided either by the state provider Kainga Ora or by community groups like the ones that I look after, and we simply do not have enough affordable housing in New Zealand, and we have not had enough affordable housing in New Zealand since the reforms of the late 80s and early 90s, which is when the deficit began to accumulate. And that's why your listeners are seeing homeless people at levels which we haven't seen for a number of years in New Zealand, all over our towns and cities.
What's the estimated shortfall in this kind of housing?
We're into tens of thousands. So I mean, if you want a really crude proxy for persistent unmet housing need, then you can go to the MSD housing register, the social housing register, which is currently at 20,000. That's in the ballpark, we would say, but in our sector we know that that's not a true reflection of the actual unmet need, because in many places in New Zealand, people who are struggling are also quite intelligent and they know that there are no available affordable houses. So why would you go and embarrass yourself at an office of work and income saying you need housing in Invercargill or Stewart Island or the Chathams or wherever you are, when you know that those houses don't exist? You're not going to bother to register on a list for a house you know doesn't exist.
So what's happening right now is that under this coalition government, the money being spent on state housing is being pulled back. And now we're hearing about a number of state house projects that have been cancelled and land either being sold off or the Kainga Ora's just going to sit on this land for some time. Meanwhile, there's your sector of social housing providers who are being encouraged to do more, but just haven't got the finance to fill the gap.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate description of the current situation. So just think of it at a household level, right? If you want to go and buy a house, you need to have a deposit in order to go and borrow the money from the bank to get a mortgage to buy the house. It's the same for our community housing sector. It's just at a larger scale. And so, like anyone else, we need to have some spare available equity or capital on our balance sheets if we're going to go to a bank and say, hey, we want to build another 10 houses over here for $7 million or 100 houses over there for $60 million or whatever. And so, yes, that is a limitation on our ability to continue to deliver new supply.
If the status quo continues, what's going to happen? What are we going to see in New Zealand?
We'll see ongoing increased volumes of people in the stressed renter intermediate market. We will see ongoing growth in homelessness in all of its forms, not just streeties, but people sort of sofa surfing, people in cars, people in precarious housing situations. We will see the expansion again of boarding houses and significantly suboptimal housing arrangements for people. And we will see the impacts of that inadequate housing spilling into the health system, the judicial system, and into corrections, because homelessness is not a lifestyle choice. We have extraordinarily successful programs running in New Zealand, and I'll name Housing First as the best of them. And just to make the point quite strongly, because there is this rhetoric and this conversation in New Zealand, in fact, the New Zealand Herald did an editorial on it earlier in the week, that homelessness is a lifestyle choice. Well, the proof is that 92% of people going into Housing First stay there permanently. So clearly that's not true. If it was a lifestyle choice, they wouldn't stay there. If people are provided with an adequate home, everything changes for the better. And so we have, I believe, all the solutions that we need in the New Zealand housing context are available. We just need to scale them up and we need to replicate them into other places. I actually believe as New Zealanders, if we put our minds to this and we make some different choices, we can absolutely solve our housing crisis.
But scaling up, that takes a lot more money. I mean, have you got an estimate of how much more it would take?
Yeah, we're into tens of billions of dollars, but we now have a scalable solution in the form of the Community Housing Funding Agency, which didn't exist before November last year. It still doesn't enjoy the status of its equivalent in other jurisdictions, including Australia and Switzerland and Finland and the US and other places where it has a full government guarantee, which is at that point becomes a game changer because basically it reduces the risk to investors, but actually the gold standard is a government guarantee on that program, and then it would really begin to fly. So there's some good news out there, but as you say, for both local government and for central government, housing interventions are very scary because the numbers are so large. The average cost per intervention is $500,000, and so very, very quickly the numbers are into the tens of billions of dollars. The government needs to come with the funding because it's the funding, and that means effectively the paying of the rent and the subsidies from the government that support that over a long-term contract are the magic thing that unlocks the ability to do this at scale. And so if the government is willing to turn that dial up, we can, as a sector, walking alongside Kainga Ora, deliver the outcomes that New Zealanders, I think, want in terms of their vision of the sort of country that they want to live in.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Phil Benge. Thanks to Jonathan Milne, Paul Gilbert and Jeremy of Onehunga. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Ka kite.